Is it awkward when you first pick up a tennis racket? Is it awkward when you first pick up a golf club? Of course it is. But with practice and intentionality, all of a sudden it becomes part of your rhythm. And the reason people don't like tennis is because they don't practice or they're not good at it. And so let's get good at communication, because really that's the essence of how you operate together.
Hey, welcome to Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. This donor-supported podcast helps blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. I'm so glad you've joined us. Welcome to episode 84, Relationship Essentials, Tools for Healthier Relationships. Hey, I've got to say thank you to a few of you. More and more of our listeners are giving to Family Life to show gratitude for this podcast and the many resources and events that we offer. I got to tell you, we are so dependent on the generosity of people like you. You hear me say it every time. This is a donor-supported podcast. Well, I mean it. So your gift of $10 a month, $25, $100, whatever gift you want to give, it really means a lot. So thank you. Hannah wrote to me recently and asked if we could recommend some groups for blended families or if we knew any counselors in her area. Well, Hannah, yes, actually we can and we do. First of all, let me just tell you, if you don't know, we have a searchable map at familylife.com/blended. You can just go there, click attend. You'll see where our events are going to be and where churches and small groups are meeting all around North America. And by the way, if you have a small group or a ministry in your church that's not on there, well, put it on there. And there's directions, and it's very easy to do, and it doesn't cost you anything. And we want to connect churches to ministries and ministries to churches. So that's a great place, Hannah, for you to go look and see if you can find a group. Now, some of the groups, more and more these days, actually are virtual groups. So make sure you look at all of them and see if it's a virtual group. It might be tagged in a given area, but it might be available to anyone, anywhere. So make sure you look for that. As for counselors, I actually train therapists on a regular basis to work with blended families, so you can access that international list of recognized Smart Step Family therapy providers. The show notes will tell you how you can get a hold of that. Some of them actually work virtually as well as in person, so make sure you look through the listing for someone who might be available for you. Okay, I've got a quote for you. The book, Relationship Essentials, is the essential guide to critical relationship skills that are needed in every important relationship. You will apply what you learn in this book to your relationships with family, friends, and coworkers. Practical and user-friendly, this book will significantly raise your relationship IQ. Where'd that quote come from? Well, it came from me. That's what I said about the book we're going to be talking about with the two authors that wrote it. Relationship Essentials is the book. Joneen, Mackenzie, and her daughter, Lauren Reitsema, are the authors. What is a relationship IQ? Well, sometimes it's called your EQ or your emotional quotient. And basically, it refers to the wisdom and skills that you need for doing relationships well. Most of us have a couple of tools in our relationship toolbox, but most of us need to add some tools. That's what we want to try to help you with today. Joneen Mackenzie is a national speaker and relationship trainer. She's the president and founder of the Center for Relationship Education in Denver. Her daughter, Lauren Reitsema, is the vice president of strategy and communications at the center. She teaches relationship skills to youth, adults, and corporate teams. Okay, the audio quality is a little fuzzy, but if you listen through that, the quality of the conversation is really great. Get ready for this dynamic mother-daughter duo, Joneen Mackenzie and Lauren Reitsema. So Joneen, Lauren, thanks so much for being with me.
Delighted.
Yeah, appreciate you guys being here. Okay, so our listeners and our followers have probably heard you guys before. People who follow this podcast will know episode number 52, we had you guys on our backstage interviews that we did at Blended and Blessed 2019. I interviewed both of you, for those who haven't heard that, about your blended family. You're a mother and a daughter. And so we got both perspectives about life in your blended family situation. Lauren, you've also been on this podcast a number of times in the past. Episode 14, we talked about your book, In Their Shoes. And then episode number 79, advice to children. And some of our ministry leaders may know you from speaking at our summit on step family ministry in the past. So you guys are regulars. Can I just call you regulars? How about that?
You
I
bet.
like being a regular. Sure thing.
Okay, so not only have you guys appeared on this podcast together before, you guys actually work day in, day out together at the Center for Relationship Education in Denver. How does that work, mother and daughter? You guys ever kind of look at each other a little cross-eyed every once in a while?
Ron, it really gives us a lot of opportunities to practice the skills that we teach.
Uh-huh.
No, truly, it is something that never started as a family affair, but that we felt drawn to and committed to based on our family structure and what we've learned. And it actually creates a context for really testing the theory that we bring into the world in a place that's real and relevant and meaningful, not only personally, but professionally. So yes, we do have some of those moments where we pull out these tools, but for the most part, it's a lot of fun, and we're wired differently and get to see the best of each other in our different roles.
And when I watch Lauren with her skill set, she has an amazing skill set. She actually went to school to learn about communication so that she could break the cycle of divorce in her legacy, in her family. And that was part of her healing. And then she worked for Young Life on staff for a while. And I wanted her to come to work for me because I felt like her skill set matched. And when I watch her and her skills, I am amazed at this woman, totally amazed. And I think the way we work together is a place of mutual respect and honor.
Wow. We just started our podcast with a mother commending her daughter. How cool is that? Lauren, that had to feel nice.
It does. I'm a words person, so even grown daughters need to hear that their mom's proud of them every once in a while.
Yeah, that is exactly right. I don't care how old you are. You're always a son or a daughter, or you're always a parent. Doesn't matter how old your child is. That seems to be true. Well, I'm so glad you guys referenced using the skills, because that's exactly what I was going to ask you. We're going to be talking about skills that you guys have written about in this great new book, Relationship Essentials. I've heard boundaries in there. I heard communication in there. We can come back to that here in a little bit. But let's just jump into some of the takeaways that this book offers. By the way, the subtitle is Skills to Feel Heard, Fight Fair, and Set Boundaries in All Areas of Life. All meaning that the skills you guys talk about are going to be applicable to family, marriage, work, personal relationships, friendships, all kinds of relationships. But what do you mean by feel heard? Why is that important?
Well, one of the things that we have done over the years is partnered with many players who are in this field of relationship education. It's really a new data set that a lot of people didn't know existed. We kind of did relationships by feelings. And Dr. Scott Stanley at the University of Denver, who's very famous in the marriage world, talks about one of the biggest things that break people apart or deconstruct relationships is the inability to work through conflict. And one of the things that needs to happen is the first thing to solve a problem is to feel heard. It doesn't have to be agreement. It doesn't have to be problem solving. It's just both of you need to be able to feel heard. And that happens in the workplace. It happens in families. It happens in romance. It happens with friendship. And so that feeling heard, feeling known, feeling supported in what you're going through, even if a person doesn't agree with you, that's the first step.
And in the context of a blended family, this is a really important one for me to actually put in writing. It's why it started our subheader for the books, meaning because as a child of divorce, knowing that many blended families are listening, that's one of the first things that a child needs is a voice. They need to feel like they have a say in a decision that wasn't theirs to make. And a lot of times they don't even know what they don't know in the age that they're developing to call for a voice, but they don't know how. And so the hope is that even younger children could apply some of these skills to feel heard so that they have a voice in something that's happening to them without their consent.
It's a very important concept for children. I love the little piece there you added, Joneen, about it's not just about feeling heard, it's about being known. I mean, ultimately, we just want to know that somebody cares about us. I think this is a mutual respect, right? Feeling heard and sharing that with another person is in part about respecting them and showing that respect and then receiving some respect from them.
Yes, and I can't tell you how much being heard and feeling known and feeling like you're not invisible sets the stage for health and wellness. And I'll give you an example, Ron, is that when things were going sideways in our family, we had family meetings, especially when the kids were teenagers. And I had a flip chart and markers, and everybody got a turn to say, how are we doing? How are we doing as a family? What's working? What's not working? What do you like? What you don't like? Part of parenting and relationships is asking the right questions.
Okay, I know that's a piece that came up in the book as well. I want to come back to that in just a little bit. We've already started talking about communication. That's one of the skills you guys talk about. By the way, you do this really cool thing in the book that I don't know that I've ever seen anywhere else. You connect every skill you talk about to an actual tool. Men are going to love this book because the first chapter is about power drills. All right, so what does a power drill have to do with communication? Make that connection for us.
So the tools thing, it was so fun when I had the opportunity to write this book and invited my mom to co-author. We had this epiphany about how we say the word skills and we say tools all the time, but it always stays in the metaphor. And we're all about taking theoretical and operating in a way where people have a takeaway that they can actually practice. And so we thought about just all the building projects that you do around a house. And I'm the granddaughter of, and Joneen is the daughter-in-law of an architect. And my grandpa used to always talk about his tools. And one of the very last things I remember him saying to me before he passed, which was a really special conversation, he just said, it all starts with a hammer and a nail. You can build anything with a hammer and a nail. And so as I was looking at these resources and these skills that I've had in my toolbox, and that we share with others to put into their toolbox, we thought, how cool would it be to actually physically put a tool in this book that you could operationalize with a skill? So the power drill, if you've ever tried to use a power drill, you know that it has three parts. It has the drill itself, it has the bit, and then you have to plug it in or put batteries in it, whether it's a cordless or battery powered, it doesn't matter. But if you don't have those three components, then the power of that tool stops functioning. It doesn't work at all. And so the power drill applies to the 3 C's of communication that we developed, which are context, content, and connection. And content is the first thing. That was kind of like, what is actually going to be said? That's the bit that you're choosing. What's your bit? You think of a comic, and they say, what's your bit? What's going to make people laugh? What are the words that you use? And those come in all different shapes and sizes, and they spin different directions. But whatever spin you put on your bit, that's the message. That's the content. And then you put that into the drill itself, which is the setting. It's the model that you pick up at the hardware store. It's the the watts that it has. It's the amount of the color that you choose. It's the physical setting that holds this bit. And then the power, the connection is actually getting the bit into the piece of wood or whatever that you're trying to make a connection and make sure that there was actual contact. Because so often in communication, we think that we drilled a hole and that somebody heard what we said. But so often we find that you can say the right thing in the right place and it still goes over people's heads. So the whole idea of that interdependence of all three parts, the drill, the bit, and the connection to the surface you're trying to work on, is a great tactical way to remember to check your C's and make sure that you've fully communicated.
Okay, so I just got to throw something in here for our listener. And this thing about communication and doing it well is really, really important, in particular for blended families. And here's why. Blended families rely on intentional communication to foster and deepen relationships. Biological families just sort of have it by default. You just have relationship, and the communication helps kind of move you through life and experience together, but you don't really have to go back and define relationship. You just, by default, you're my dad, I'm your son, you're my spouse, whatever it is, that's just sort of there. But in blended families, every moment is an opportunity to continue to define your relationship, how you're going to be family with each other, what it's going to look like, what it requires of you, what the expectations are, who you are, really being known, getting to know each other in the early phase is so very important. Like that all comes down to communication. And so if I'm getting the metaphor right, if you miss one element of the power drill, then you miss on your communication. It's miscommunication, and you're not necessarily bringing clarity to your relationship. It just keeps it ambiguous. Joneen, it's so easy to get two of the three in there, but then miss one. You know, it seems like paying attention to all three of those elements is a little taxing. Isn't that hard? I mean, I remember back when I was first trying to learn how to do some of this stuff, and I felt like I was thinking all the time. Is that true? Is that part of the process of learning this for most people?
Agreed, absolutely. One of the things when we do workshops teaching these communication skills with the 3 C's, people say, well, this is kind of awkward because you really have to think before you speak. You really have to plan out making sure that somebody is not in the middle of doing something else, right? You have to make sure that you have their full attention, all of those things. So what Lauren and I say in workshops is, is it awkward when you first pick up a tennis racket? Is it awkward when you first pick up a golf club? Of course it is. But with practice and intentionality, all of a sudden it becomes part of your rhythm. And the reason people don't like tennis is because they don't practice or they're not good at it. And so let's get good at communication, because really that's the essence of how you operate together.
And I would add to that what oftentimes feels complex is actually simplified when you put it into practice. It's the lack of practice, as Joneen was referring to with the tennis racket, that actually makes us feel overwhelmed. And so I've actually been practicing this since it went to paper in this book, is when I have a communication exchange in any setting, have I clarified my content? Is it the right content for the person I'm talking to? Have I made sure that I've contextualized it for that person and picked a setting that is free from distractions? And have I affirmed that message was received? And if I can say yes to all those 3 things, I'm a performance-driven person. I want a checklist. I want to know how I'm doing. You can set your own goals and be a lot more confident walking away from communication saying, instead of, did I do that well, or was that a total miss? You can say, well, I had content, I had context, and we verified connection. And we can all get really good at this with just checking those 3 C's.
Yeah. I remember years ago hearing Gary Smalley talk about, hey, even McDonald's does this. You go to the drive-thru and you order something, and the person on the voice on the other end says, Okay, so this is what you want. And they repeat back what they heard you say, and you confirm it. You go, yeah, that's what I want. Now, occasionally they get it wrong, and that's a moment where you say, no, I don't want that. I want this. And you clarify. And then they repeat it back again. And until they get it right, they really haven't pleased the customer. Like, that's just a really good, simple little way of thinking about communication. Whether you're giving or receiving, you want to communicate something in a way that people can hear it. And if they don't quite hear it right, then you can say it another way and try to make it easier for them to hear what you're saying. And then ask them to confirm. What did you hear me say? Or if you're on the receiving end, you just repeat it back. Like, that simple little effort goes a long way towards good customer relations and pretty good relationship skills. Is there anything you guys would add to that simple little model there?
Well, the simplicity of it is captivating because I could tell you a story. We did a workshop here at our office, which is a marriage workshop, and we had pods of people practicing these skills. And one of the people in the coupling, in the dyad, started to weep. And the coach that was supposed to be designated for that couple went in and said, "How can I help you?" And she said, no, I'm weeping because it's the first time in our married life that I have felt heard. And it was so tender and so real and so raw that her husband just grabbed her hand and in a way leaned into her. And they were a conflicted couple when they walked in. It was amazing.
Yeah, she was seen. She started to feel known and more connected to her husband. That's really what it's all about. Connectication. That's what some friends of mine say. It's not communication, it's connectication. That's ultimately what we're chasing.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love it.
Well, obviously, what you say matters. I was thinking of Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only what is good for building others up as it fits the occasion, that it might give grace to those who hear it. That's just speaking to the content, right? What are you saying? Is it something that's helpful for people, or is it something that breaks them down? When do you start disciplining yourself so that you're saying things that are more helpful and less critical, less hurtful? Obviously, that's going to make a difference. Okay, so that's just one skill in the book. Let's do a couple others. You guys talk about a flashlight. What's the deal with a flashlight?
The flashlight. I love flashlight tag is one of my kids' favorite summer night games. And as the seasons turn here, I'm so excited to play. Flashlight is really an easy way to remember what's very difficult to do. And that is to put others first and to spotlight them, not only in interest and in seeking to know, but also in the amount of time that you give them to speak. We have lots of confirmed evidence that there's a bias in our brain that is biased towards self. And we think about ourselves the most. We communicate about ourselves the most. We look for ourselves first when we have a family picture posted. We don't scan the room and look at who's in the room. We scan usually and see who's looking at us. I love this for adolescents and teenagers that I work with because they're always worried about their first zit. And I always say, they're not looking at your zit. They're worried about the mirror that's reflecting their own. So don't give that so much power. So the spotlight technique actually is demonstrated through a flashlight, which basically says, shine the flashlight on others. Stop grabbing the attention for yourself, and you will watch your relationships transform.
This is making me think about Philippians 2, where Paul says the model is Christ, who did not just consider his own interests, but the interests of others, and put others before your own. You guys say something interesting. Play on words. You say being interested makes you interesting. Say a little more about that.
Oh, that's my favorite saying. That's kind of a legacy thing that I have because I have this little thing that I watch and wait. I'll ask a bunch of questions on the airplane when I'm flying to train or whatever. And I'll say, are you going home? Are you going for business? Are you, is this your first flight? Where did you come from? And I ask a bunch of questions and try to engage this person in conversation. And then if they don't ask me a question within 5 minutes, I think, working too hard. I'm working too hard. Put my earphones on and just sleep or work or do whatever I need to do on an airplane. The thing is, people who are interested in others. They have a sense of who they are. They have a self-awareness, and they have an other awareness. We have a little exercise that we do and a skill that we teach, and in our workshops that is called Not I. And it says if you say the word I and you're talking about yourself, the only rule is you cannot talk about, you can talk about yourself, but you cannot say the word I. You have to use different creativity. You have to speak in the third person. And if your partner hears you saying the word I, they do have a squeaky toy and tattle on you. And it's hysterical. It is the whole room is laughing out loud because we don't realize how many times we say the word I. And we need to be other focused to really allow that flashlight to be shown on other folks as well as ourselves.
I know you guys are familiar with attachment literature, and speaking of relationships that have a strong emotional bond and connection, I think we are less focused on I or self in the midst of strong relationships. I don't have to be as self-conscious when I feel, your love, I feel your commitment, I feel like our us is very strong. On the other hand, in insecure relationships or fragile, or maybe let's call it developing, like in blended families, the first few years, there's a lot of insecurity about where you stand with other people and where they stand with you. And I think that environment creates more self-consciousness, more of an I focus. It would be very interesting to take that little challenge that you just offered for our listeners to say, you know what, I'm instead of walking in the room hoping somebody will notice me or speak to me, I'm going to instead start trying to focus my energy on the people in the room and be interested in them. I wonder if that would be, do you guys think that potentially could help, especially some strained relationships?
I don't just think it, we know it to be true. We experience this in any type of environment that you're trying to create a welcoming, warm, and hospitable room. And it's exhausting. The insecurity drain is real. And it's exhausting when you're just pining for people to give you attention. It's almost like a toddler. I have a 3-year-old at home, and she wants the spotlight. She'll throw tantrums to have the spotlight. And when she can learn how to get the light on her in a positive way, the energy drain disappears. And it's actually like the whole family works together. But when she's trying to get the spotlight in a negative way, which often happens in a blended family or in a high stress environment, we end up in that insecurity trying to grab the light. And instead of creating that warm, safe, hospitable environment, we end up feeling like we're on stage and entertaining. And entertainment is funny, it's dramatic, it draws people in, but it's not relationship, it's not connection. So one thing my mom always says that I love to emulate is work toward being hospitable toward people to connect with their heart. Don't try and entertain them for your attention. And that hospitality versus entertainment can change the dynamic of a relationship, because shining the spotlight on others, although more challenging, is so much more fulfilling. And what ends up happening is you become more secure because people feel safe around you and they want to be with you because you put them first. What a concept.
What a concept.
Right. The country needs this. The country needs this. And one of the things that I always say is everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. Find out what their story is. Find out where they grew up. Find out what their family was like. Find out what colors they like. What's the best movie that they, loved? Why do they love that movie? You will find out so much about that person that any differences or implicit biases or, assumptions drain away. And doesn't our country need this?
Oh, my. Yes, from the macro relationships in the social media world to the politicians, all the way down to our households. What a great concept. Let's move on to another skill, the tape measure. I really like this one. And guys, I know our listeners, this is a big one for our listeners. We get all kinds of questions here through people who listen to the podcast or through our social media channels. People want to know, how do I set boundaries with my stepdaughter and when my spouse really won't set boundaries with them? How do I deal with an ex-spouse who just sort of, doesn't really care what's in the divorce decree? How do I? And so much of it comes down to this issue of boundaries. All right, so talk around this. Why the tape measure? How does that connect to the concept?
The tape measure, because I love acronyms, that's why. And acronyms are easy to remember. And I had an epiphany night where I thought time, auditory, physical, and emotional. Those are the places that we need to set limits in our life. And it just happened to spell tape. And so I put it on my little notepad. We integrated into this tape measure that in order to set and keep healthy boundaries, you have to measure first and then cut. And oftentimes we try and set our boundaries in motion, and it doesn't work. It would be like trying to frame a basement without actually marking where you're cutting the wood while the saw is running. That's what we do. We try and, I'll set the boundary when I get there. I'll test the boundary until I have self-control. I'll push the boundary until someone explodes. And it never ends well if you don't measure first and then cut. And so this is an analogy that really helps put some practical boundaries around setting boundaries. And the way that we outline tape is time limits is what the T stands for. What are your boundaries with your time? How much time are you going to spend with that stepdaughter? Is it an expectation that you're there every day of her life? Or maybe you have a once a month check-in that's face-to-face out to dinner. Is it something that she allows her time for? Or are you butting into her time? How is it on her side? So time limits are really important. Being on time for places, honoring people's time in meetings, all of those things are really practical to say, I have time limits, and that's a very strict boundary. The auditory one is really important, too, because that's what we put in writing for what you're willing to listen to. Some of my auditory limits are I really am sensitive towards sarcasm. If sarcasm comes up in a family dinner conversation or in my relationships, I immediately set that limit and say, I'm so sorry. Sarcasm doesn't work for me. It tears my flesh. It's not humorous, and I've seen it do some damage in my relationships. So I'm not going to listen to this, and I can walk out. Or profanity or crude jokes, racism, those types of things. I don't listen to this because my ears cannot take it. It hurts my heart. That's the auditory part. And then physical is personal space. How close can I get to someone in a meaningful and relevant way? And are we setting those limits in our communication, and are we honoring those with physical boundaries? And then last, but certainly not less important, is emotional. And emotional boundaries are the ones that are kind of secretly crossed because people don't even know what they are. And emotional boundaries include things like gaslighting and manipulation. And are you willing to be minimized or to let someone speak to you a certain way? I've just in my marriage, I love what my husband and I have chosen to do with this one, because we just will say if something hurts us or if we say something that crosses an emotional boundary, we say the word ouch, and then we just say, I'm your partner. You cannot talk to me like that. I am your wife, or I am your husband. I am not your child. I am not your colleague. I'm not your subordinate. I'm your partner. And so just saying that out loud to say you just crossed an emotional limit and you took it too far helps us say, oh, that's a measurement issue, and we need to retract our boundaries so that we can have more freedom.
Okay, Joneen, I want to follow up with you about something she just said. I love, Lauren, that you and your husband have agreed that this is how you're going to deal with those little moments. You've got a little code, and you've talked it through, and you've kind of given each other permission. Joneen, you've been in a situation where you're a parent / step-parent, and you're now head of a blended family, and you're trying to figure out new relationships, your husband with your kids, and all kinds of different things going on in the house. How do you handle this boundary thing? Any guidelines you would give us about working with your spouse before setting boundaries with kids? Talk around that for a minute.
Well, first of all, we say boundaries are kind because they're clear. And the clarity has to come first. And I think that around boundaries, especially when we were dating and we were moving towards engagement, we set these expectations that here's what I want you to know. I will not do this, but I will do this. I will not do this, but I will do this. Then he had a chance to set his expectations. And that's kind of setting the line, setting the tape measure that she's talking about, setting the tape measure. And when they're articulated in an expectation, written down in a journal or whatever you decide to do as you're blending your family, or even if you're blended, now's a chance to redo it and say, this is my expectation. And what should we do? Tell me what the clue is. Is it an ouch? What is a word? What is something that we can do together that we know we've broken a boundary so that we don't have to always say you broke a boundary. It's already clear. And again, they're kind because they're clear. So in blending this family, times it was broken, but for the most part, we minimized that drama because we planned ahead. We kind of knew, and me being in this field, I kind of knew what could happen. And I've read the books and I've been in seminars, and so I knew that this was something that we needed to do. And so a boundary for me was with my prospective new spouse is, how does this sound to you? Does this sound reasonable? I'm going to share this expectation with you. You do the same on your side with your kids and your family and your expectations, and then we'll work it out together. But there needs to be a code word for when a boundary is broken, and then we recalibrate.
Yeah. Okay. Go with that a little bit more. So what if you're on the receiving end, Joneen? You broke a boundary. You didn't realize it, good intentions, whatever the case was, but you broke a boundary and your partner just sort of said, ouch. What's the discipline that we all need when we make a mistake?
Oh, well, then you ask for forgiveness. You say, I am so sorry. I did not meet up to your expectations. I would ask that you would forgive me. Don't make excuses. Don't blame shift. Own it. That's another skill in the book is own it. Take responsibility. And once somebody takes responsibility, the level of honor and respect goes way high because nobody does that anymore. Everybody blame shifts. It's so prevalent in our society of making excuses, of blame shifting, of not taking ownership. That's the sign of an adult. And we have a whole culture that wears the I don't want an adult today t-shirt. They act like a bunch of adolescents. I want to deal with an adult. I've raised my children. I raised my adolescents. Now I want to deal with an adult.
I can speak to, even though we're in the field, you've read the books, when it hits you in the home environment, you feel stuck oftentimes. And the pressure to do the right thing is real when this is your field. That, when putting relationship essentials out there was a risk because that means that, all of a sudden we're just relationship experts and we have perfect connections. Not necessarily. However, if we use these tools, we're going to build something beautiful. So we're accountable in that way. And I think one of the things about boundaries that I've seen as a child of our blended family is when a boundary is broken and the emotional, and I said when because nobody does this perfectly, when a boundary is broken and the emotional ramifications kind of surface, you actually have the right and the responsibility to kindly communicate that in a way that honors all the roles. And we share this story. If you've listened before, you may have heard this in one of your podcasts even, but about the broken boundary of tradition that we had worked so hard to set up with our nuclear family around that Christmas fondue. And when my stepdad, with good intention, tried to take that fondue Christmas away and cook something different, it was a broken boundary to all the children who had found this peace in establishing a new normal. And he didn't know it was a broken boundary until the emotion surfaced. And now he knows, okay, I have to reset that line. Mm-hmm. And we joke about it now, but at the time it didn't feel funny. It felt frustrating and it felt mean-spirited. And that wasn't the intent, but it still happened. And so I think that's something with broken boundaries is, even if you didn't mean for it to happen, it still happened. And so you have to deal with it. Otherwise, it's just going to creep up sometime later.
Yeah. So I love the scissors is the tool you talk about in the book for cut out the excuses and own your mistakes. That's a great way to start. And then you regroup and you say, wow, what just happened? I don't know. Obviously a lot of emotion in the room. Tell me what this means. Then you go back to being interested in what's behind all this emotion rather than just shutting it down, because then you're not going to learn anything. You're not going to learn what's behind the emotion, and you're not going to learn what you need to do differently with it in the future. So live and learn. I'm totally with you. Those of us in the field, I am an imperfect person, just like the next person. And I have moments where I totally dysregulate like everybody else. And it's, what do I do now? Like, let me pull back, regroup, and try again. Like, that's the human experience. And so, yeah, learn from those mistakes so that you make less and less of them going forward. And the irony is for blended families is mistakes is one of the ways you learn where the boundaries need to be so you can become family. Like, you actually need the mistakes every once in a while to help you refine your definition of who you are and how you're going to be family with one another. Well, guys, there's so much more in this book that we have not talked about. I'm going to give you an opportunity to maybe just share one of the principles that we have not yet talked about. I'll give you a minute to think about that. But I'd love for you to just maybe throw one more in there and give people understanding of why you think that principle would be helpful for them in their blended family.
Well, I don't think I need a minute to think about it because it's on my mind all the time.
All right, let's have it. You've been listening to my conversation with Lauren Reitsema and Joneen Mackenzie. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. We will hear their response to that question in just a minute. Hey, if you have a topic or question you'd like for us to address on a future podcast, you can email it to us or maybe even leave a voice message that we'll use on the air. The show notes will tell you how you can do that. We heard from one listener who asked, how do I set boundaries with an ex-spouse who has a history of verbal abuse toward me and who has ignored our boundaries in the past? Well, that's a great question, and we hear it a lot here at Family Life Blended. Well, it's not the only answer, but let's try to apply one of the skills that we just heard Joneen and Lauren talk about to this situation. Remember we talked about that speaker-listener technique? Usually it's used to deepen an intimate relationship, like a husband-wife relationship or a parent-child relationship. But you can use it in different contexts. So imagine your former husband repeatedly brings the kids home late. And I don't mean just a few minutes late, I mean late. It's driving you crazy. What do? Okay, well, the first thing you can do is sort of take a one-down posture, and what we mean by that is you're asking a question rather than a one-up posture of being critical or angry or trying to tell him what to do. So you're taking a one-down posture, and you're going to apply the speaker-listener technique. It might sound something like this. Hey, I'm confused. We agreed to certain drop-off times, and the court requires compliance, but you have a habit of dropping the kids off at least 30 minutes late, even when you know that we're trying to get someplace. Now, what I hear you saying when you do that is that my time with the kids is not as important as your time or your schedule, and that you don't care what the judge has ordered. I'm confused. Am I hearing you correctly? Now, notice what you've done. If you do this sort of reflective statement based on their behavior, not something maybe he's actually said with words, but what he's saying with his behavior, you've done a number of things. Number one, By putting words on his behavior, you've made it obvious. It's harder for him to run away from that. You're putting words on it. It's now overt, and he sort of hears back what he's saying to you. Secondly, you may be wrong. You may be misinterpreting his behavior and what it means or why he's doing it. So by asking a question, you actually give him an opportunity to clarify if there's something there that you don't know. But then number 3, you've made it harder. Let's say you're right. You've sort of made it harder for him to keep doing this, to keep saying this, if you will, over and over and over again. He can't pretend that he isn't saying something by his behavior and his choices. Now, at the end of the day, he just might not care what he's saying to you, and that's a different sort of problem. But then again, he might care if what he's been saying to you and what he's been saying to the judge somehow gets communicated to the judge. That's an option you can just keep in your hip pocket. If you'd like more information about my guest, you'll find it in our show notes, or you can simply check it out at the Family Life Blended podcast page at familylife.com/blended podcast. And while you're there, make sure you check out everything Family Life has for your marriage and family. Our division, Family Life Blended, has the world's largest collection of articles, videos, online courses like Well Blended, and books for blended families, like my one-year devotional Daily Encouragement for the Smart Step Family. We've also got Lauren Reitsema's first book called In Their Shoes, helping parents better understand and connect with children of divorce. Check us out. The show notes will tell you how. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, please do that. We don't want you to miss any future episodes. You can do that by downloading the Family Life app, or you can do that through your podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And in addition to this podcast, one of the ways people really are learning a lot and growing their families and their relationship is by attending a small group, studying a curriculum together. We know that's important for people, which is why Family Life Blended has more curriculum and is doing more to train local leaders in blended family ministry than anyone else on the planet. We've got an online course that you can do at your own pace. It's called the Certificate in Blended Family Ministry. That's what you go through if you want to learn how to help other people in your church and community. And each fall, we sponsor a 2-day in-person conference called the Summit on Step Family Ministry, where we bring together leaders and experts from various disciplines and churches so you can network with others and learn the latest strategies for doing blended family ministry. That's summitonstepfamilies.com, or you can just look in the show notes. Now, before we're done, here's a final word from Lauren and Joneen.
One of the questions I say, is what is your superpower? What is your superpower? I love that question. And I think for my family and for my marriage, it's gratitude. It's looking at things that are half full, looking at the positive, looking at trying to, yes, of course we have to deal with the negative, but if everything is negative, nothing is positive. And the superpower, when I feel like I'm being appreciated and I'm expressing gratitude to others, and I'm expressing gratitude to God for all the blessings that He's given us, and, me in particular, I'll just speak for myself, I feel like I'm energized. It doesn't matter how tired I am. I feel like I'm at the top of the battery. I'm fully charged. And when I start looking at all the things I have to do and all the things I should do and all the things I didn't do and oh my gosh, it wears me out. And so I really need to reframe constantly, where's my gratitude? What am I thankful for? What am I going to do with this? Who am I going to tell how grateful I am for them? Whatever they're doing in the house, whether it's picking up something on the floor, say thank you. Say please with your family. Just don't do it for strangers. Do it for your family. It changes the energy level in your home.
It's fun to hear that you picked that one, because mine, I love the battery supercharged gratitude, but I actually thought of a different one. Maybe it's because I'm short. Is the extension ladder, which is the long view. Maybe it's because I'm short, or maybe because I don't want to get old. But I love the extension ladder in this toolbox, because so often we just feel stuck at the layer that we can see, and it's so overwhelming that we feel like we'll never get out. And I think that could not be more real in a blended family where nothing is ever going to be okay. And I cannot deal with this one more day. I cannot relive this trauma of divorce, but this is not getting any better. These kids are a disaster. Our communication is in the toilet. What is going on? And as you climb a rung, you get a little bit more perspective. As you climb a rung, you get a little bit more perspective. And I love to fly. I love to travel. And truly, there's something awe-inspiring about raising up over the clouds from the surface of the ground on an airplane, where what feels so big, those huge skyscrapers, look like little micro machines once you're seeing it from a higher perspective. And so the extension ladder is really meaningful to me because it gets me a little height that I was not born with in my gene pool, but it also gives me the long view, which I don't think we have a lot of discipline in our society to actually exercise. And so it challenges me to think beyond and to think ahead and to dream for a future, which is the pinnacle of hope. Hope is in the future. And for those of us stuck in the present, we need that hope to take the next step and to take the next breath. And so the extension ladder for me is a really hopeful tool.
That's really good. You know, I think about God's word is a massive extension ladder, if we want to use that terminology. It is eternal perspective. It is heaven's perspective on what's happening here on earth. You can't get any higher than that. And it offers us life wisdom, looking past all the momentary problems or issues of life, and it helps us rise above to what really matters in terms of how we treat one another and how we think about what's happening in the world and our place in the world, our vocation to extend the kingdom to the next person and the next person. The more we are familiar with God's wisdom for life, the higher we climb up on that ladder, the better choices we make, the more disciplined we get, even in the tough moments. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your perspective, and I'm excited about this book. Gave it a great review because I believe in it and it's practical. And I love that it's applicable to all kinds of relationships and situations. And I know that our listeners are going to be able to easily apply what they learn there to what's happening right there in their home. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Ron.
Next time, we're going to hear from Bill and Evelyn Husband Thompson about surviving the loss of your spouse and starting over. That's Bill and Evelyn Thompson next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening. And thanks to our monthly donors who make this podcast possible. If you'd like to join our Family Life Partner Program or just simply say thank you with a donation, look in the show notes for a link. Believe me, every dollar helps. Our producer is Marcus Holt, mastering engineer Jarrett Roski, project coordinator Ann Encaro, and theme music composed and performed by Braden Deal. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.